Well, the trend is still customers are adopting the cloud judiciously.
If anything, security is going to take a bigger stage as we continue to move toward cloud adoption.
Welcome to the Cloud Security Predictions webinar here at Palo Alto Networks. Today, we have an esteemed panel of thought leaders and subject matter experts joining us out here in our studio to discuss and share their insights around security predictions for 2019. So, let me start to the left. On my left, I have Matt Chiodi. He's the Chief Security Officer at Palo Alto Networks for Public Cloud. And to his left, I have Varun Badwar, Senior Vice President, Products and Research and Development for Public Cloud Security at Palo Alto Networks. And on the far right, we have Ankur Shah, Vice President of Products at Public Cloud Security at Palo Alto Networks. Awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how cloud is fundamentally changing the organizational structure and to some extent influencing how organizations are working in recent times. And we'll start the first prediction around that particular area. So I'll start with you, Matt. You had a very interesting take on how cloud will go from CIO initiative to a board level requirement.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason I say that is because you have to look at cloud, the evolution of cloud, in really three buckets. So leading up to 2018, the move to the cloud was largely led by various different business units or even developers. And then in 2018, we saw the move to cloud become a CIO-led initiative. But 2019, we believe it's going to be the year that it's taken up by the board as a requirement for the organization. So it's a strategic enabler for the entire business.
That's our first prediction. Varun, you kind of agree with Matt's conclusions out there, but you have a different take on it. You kind of think of it from a developer standpoint. Your second prediction was really all about selection of cloud platforms is no longer a CIO-led initiative, but for different reasons. What are those reasons?
Yeah, so I think as Matt said, the board will certainly determine the need and the importance of moving to the cloud for digital transformation. But I think which cloud will be, the selection of that will be made by developers themselves. They'll pick the best of breed clouds for best of breed applications. And certainly we're seeing more and more of that where a decision for each cloud is being made at the merit of each application and their requirements. And that's how we do things here at Palo Alto Networks as well.
Ankur, you agree?
Yeah, totally. I think it's going to have to be both a top-down and a bottoms-up led initiative. I truly believe that more and more enterprises are going to embrace multi-cloud as a strategy, not something that's kind of shoved down people's throat, but something that they want to embrace. So yeah, totally agree with both the conclusions.
So do you see a lot of interest in multi-cloud from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we go before CISOs all the time, and a lot of times we'll hear them up front and say, we're an Azure shop or we're an AWS shop. But when they go back and they start to dig in and see what is actually being used in their organization, they always have at least two of the major clouds, if not three, that are in use. And so really organizations, CIOs, CISOs, they really don't have a choice. They need to work on their multi-cloud security because it's already reality in their organization.
What's your take on multi-cloud for this year, 2019? Do you think pretty much 90% of organizations are going to embrace multi-cloud? Or 80%, 70%?
I think the reality is going to be closer to 100%.
100%.
I'll just add to that regulators, in fact, we're hearing from our customers are demanding, especially in financial services and other sectors, that the organizations ensure they're not closely associated and tied into and locked into one particular cloud provider. So not only is this a good business decision, but it's now a decision being enforced, if you will, from regulators themselves.
Awesome. It's also about, multi-cloud, as we were talking about, it is in itself, if someone is locked in with one provider, that in itself can be a risk, right? None of the cloud providers are immune to outages. We've seen that over the past few years. So multi-cloud becomes a risk mitigation strategy in and of itself.
Ankur, do you see any value in sticking to one single cloud from an enterprise perspective?
There are only few cases. I mean, if you've got a lot of applications that were initially sort of in a single cloud, there is a switching cost associated. So those multi-cloud things come at a high cost. You got to kind of build your applications that are cloud agnostic. So there is sort of that inertia to ensure that whatever cloud that customer started with, they continue that. But like Matt said and Varun said, I think customers are increasingly getting wary of having a multi-cloud strategy. Developers are writing cloud-native applications that are cloud agnostic. So increasingly, I see the trend towards 100% where customers have multi-cloud.
Let's shift gears a bit and start looking at sort of predictions around cloud security in particular. 2018 was a watershed year when it came to breaches in general, especially due to misconfigurations and basically lack of continuous oversight when you're trying to manage your cloud infrastructure, and of course compliance being a big challenge in general. So Warren, you kind of talked about this from your prediction standpoint, and your prediction was quite stark and ominous. You said a fifth grader could hack cloud environments. What do you mean by that, and can you shed a little bit more light on that?
Yeah, it doesn't take a whole lot to go find cloud environments that are open. There's Shodan-like tools that are out there that are crawling the internet looking for exposed, misconfigured environments, databases, storage buckets. And quite frankly, a lot of what we're seeing is people finding the lowest hanging fruit out there, which is why if you look at advanced threats in the cloud, we haven't even got to starting to talk about advanced cloud threats because we don't need to. People are going in from the front door. Why do you need to go find ways to pick a lock or break through a window? The door's wide open.
Ankur, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think the breaches are on the rise primarily because fundamentally the threat vectors are very different in the cloud, and the attack surface is exponentially larger than it is in the on-prem environment. So that gives the adversaries more opportunities to compromise your sensitive workloads, because the existing on-prem security tooling is just not prepared to mitigate against these types of advanced threat that we're going to see increasingly. So, I predict that we're going to see more and more companies in the news owing to some breach that we've never heard of. Just last year was all about, open security buckets. This year was about cryptojacking, which is no longer economically viable. So you're not going to hear that much, but next year is going to be something completely different.
But this democratization, which Warren is talking about, that anybody could hack, even a fifth grader could hack, is that going to be the biggest challenge in 2019?
So, one of the key insights, being in security for decades, I've sort of come to recognize is that a lot of the breaches happen because of common mistakes. It's preventing the stupid. That's the problem. It's not about having a really sophisticated sort of security boundary at the host and the network level, but it's just making sure that common mistakes that are well known are not made by people who don't understand security. So that's why I think anybody can sort of breach into these environments because it's just so simple. There is a lack of awareness among the DevOps people and with security in terms of what can lead to sort of security exposure in cloud.
So let's look at some of the findings which came up from our cloud research team within the Unit 42. And in about last 4 months, they actually found some amazing information around the kind of compromises which are happening within cloud infrastructure. So one of the big sort of data points which they mentioned out there was 29% of organizations experienced potential account compromises in just a short span of 4 months. Matt, you had a very interesting take on this, and especially this, as well as some of the crypto mining and cryptojacking activity which we have seen in the last 4 months.
Yeah, absolutely. So, account compromise, right? That means I can get in, and if I've compromised your account, I can do anything that you have privileges to access within a cloud account, right? And so this gets down to things like identity and access management. How are you managing roles, right? And things like that. And that fits very well with cryptojacking, right? So, because in order to launch a cryptojacking attack, I have to first compromise an account or find some type of vulnerability. Yeah. So the two fit very well together. And as you mentioned, back in our May report, that number around cryptojacking was actually closer to, I think, 24%. And because of the value of Bitcoin, which has dropped precipitously over the last few months, it's now down to 11%. But that's still significant, right? And that's a vector that's very unique to public cloud because of the elasticity in those environments and how quickly you can spin up new compute capacity.
So, Warren, you mentioned about this, that a fifth grader could easily hack into these cloud environments, right? And there are tools available on the net right now which make it easy for everybody. I mean, there's Shodan, which is completely so easy for anybody to parse and actually search for all these different sort of vulnerable environments in cloud and sort of use that. Is that going to sort of remain through 2019? Do you feel like that's going to be the norm?
I think so. I think there's continues to be a lot of new folks coming onto the cloud. There seems to be a lot of organizations that aren't cloud savvy coming to the cloud. Everybody's charter is moving fast. And with that speed will come the dangers of making mistakes. And I'm sure we'll see more and more of that. But to Ankur's point, the vectors might continue to evolve, right? Because as people are getting more educated with S3 buckets being open, because it's been so talked about, there's more controls both from the cloud provider standpoint to avoid making those mistakes, as well as more education. And I think the best thing we can collectively do is educate the market ahead of time, so hopefully those mistakes aren't repeated.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that we've mentioned fifth graders multiple times. My son is in fifth grade. And while it's not directly related to cloud, he was able to defeat the device protections on his phone that I had put there in less than 5 minutes. So fifth graders are incredibly resourceful.
Is hacking going to be lucrative for fifth graders? That's the question, right?
Well, we should first debate the price of bitcoins and where they're going next year, and then we'll know how many more crypto miners are coming to life.
So talking about cryptojacking and crypto mining, and this is like a big topic, at least in 2018, and I'm sure it is going to continue over the next year or so. You had a very interesting prediction around that. You talked about this, saying that it's no longer just about the data. So I want to hear more thoughts around what do you mean by that statement, and how is it related to crypto mining and cryptojacking?
So I think whenever people broke into organizations, the first thing you heard about is what data was lost. How many millions of records, how many hundreds of millions of records, was it credit card information, was it PHI information? When the cloud, it's not about the data. The way you can monetize it is, quite frankly, I can break into your dev or test account because you haven't even put production apps and production data in the cloud, and that's all it takes. I'm in there and I can make money off of spinning up very large-scale instances and mining crypto. And what we found is a lot of organizations detect that when the next bill from the cloud provider is generated, and that bill is hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars that was unexpected spend. And so that's what I mean by it's no longer just about the data. It's also about all this excess compute that is accessible at the drop of a hat, as Matt said, with access to credentials or whatever else.
This has been pretty common through 2018, Ankur. So Varun says it continues in 2019. I mean, don't you feel that the customers are kind of, or rather organizations are smart enough to sort of realize this and put better protections in place?
Oh, certainly for things like the bucket breaches and crypto, you're going to see less and less of that. But guess what? AWS has close to 100 services, and so do the other clouds. They released over 1,500 features. There's more and more stuff coming up. There are more and more services and tools and resources that developers are leveraging. Again, that increases the attack vector. So there's going to be something else coming up next year, if not crypto mining. Although I do believe that the prices will go up and there will be more and more incidences of crypto mining. I have investment, so I want to make sure it does go up. But yes, I do think that that's going to continue to happen. I think unless customers have a 360 visibility into what's happening, you're going to see more and more of these kind of
Matt's not convinced.
Well, no, I don't disagree with that, but I'm saying if I'm a chief security officer, I'd rather someone go in and steal my compute rather than my data, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't have to disclose that to auditors or to a regulator if compute has been stolen from me. But if it's PHI or other sensitive data, I would much rather compute be stolen, or none of it at all, right? But choose between data or compute. I take compute any day.
Yeah.
So do you buy crypto or do you mine crypto?
I'm going long on buying for now.
What is it, Bitcoin, Ethereum, which Litecoin? I mean, what is it?
I've got all variations, but I'm still long on Bitcoins.
Okay. All right, good to know. So let's shift to the next prediction. So Ankur, I'm going to start with you on this. And you actually pointed out this shift happening within organizations, especially on the developer side of things, where the shift left movement is gaining a lot of momentum.
Yeah.
So can you sort of explain what shift left is all about and why is it gaining momentum?
Yeah. So, one of the things that's important for security teams to recognize in the cloud, it's all about automation. And security automation or orchestration has got to be part of the DevOps processes. So by shift left, what we mean is that, customers no longer have the time and the tooling and the people to remediate security alerts after the fact. They want to try to address these problems during the development, build, deploy phase so that they can sort of address those security concerns before it's deployed in the production environments. So that's where the shift left movement is gaining a lot of momentum. Customers want to ensure that as part of their CI/CD pipeline, as the code and the applications are deployed, security is embedded so that they can address those issues even before they are deployed in production. So that's where I predict that we're going to increasingly see customers and security teams demand that. DevOps and security teams will have to work together to sort of address a lot of these challenges around ensuring that alerts are found early on in the development stage and not late.
So Warren, do you think organizations have that kind of a maturity to actually embrace the shift left sort of view of the world?
I think it shouldn't even be called shift left. It should be expand left, because it's not either left or right. It's both, right? I think we've always, we started with prevention, then the whole market became detection and response. You can say that was shifting right. Now we're talking about expanding left. So I think it's all of the above. Yeah. Whether the maturity or not is there's a whole lot of things that go into it. There's the people, process, and technology. Developers need to be educated on security. You need to do the right thing. You need the right automation into the build process so it's seamless for them. So a lot of work needs to go in. I know, shift left is kind of becoming a buzzword in the industry now. And as AI and ML were, and we just have to be careful that customers understand it's not a choice.
Yeah. So there's an interesting dichotomy I'm seeing out here, Matt, right? We have Varun talking about fifth grader able to hack cloud environments, and then we have Ankur talking about shift left momentum, where developers are going to fundamentally embrace security.
Right.
Where is the middle path here?
Well, I think that what's interesting is that for such a long time, people assumed that when they moved to cloud, they were going to get automation by default. And that's not the case. Certainly the API-driven nature of cloud, right, that gives you the ability to automate, that doesn't mean you're going to get it by default. And security has always been historically behind where the developers are. They're the one that's out there. They're always searching for, what's the best cloud that I can build this, feature on the quickest and fastest. So I think that over time, it is a maturing process of moving security, shifting left, expanding left. I actually like that a lot better. I think I'm going to start using that. But we should trademark it. Yeah. But expanding left, I think it's great, because security has historically been so focused on more of waterfall, right? Of let me take a look at this at the end, and then I hold up the entire launch of a product. And that just doesn't that just doesn't work anymore.
Well, 2019 is going to be about expand left, I guess.
Yes. Trademark Palo Alto Network.
Yes. Watch the RSA conference. Everybody's going to talk about expand left.
There you go. Yeah. So cloud security is top of the mind for most of the enterprises today. Let's take a look at some of the conversations we've had in recent summits, cloud security summits, which Palo Alto Networks actually runs them all across the world, and the kind of discussions which have come through with many of our customers.
The next step is orchestration and automation. That's going to allow customers to close the skills gap.
So we're seeing a tremendous shift with, of course, automation and ensuring that as organizations scale, people can't handle it. And so automation is really the clear focus as we go forward, making sure that as cloud security is embraced, that the right native security is also in there in terms of automation and digital transformation.
So let's talk about standards and best practices, kind of going a little bit different from what we have talked about so far. I want to refer back to that report which I was talking about earlier. So our Unit 42 Cloud Research team basically published a report. It's available for you. You can click the link and actually download it and check it out. It's quite interesting. One of the interesting statistics which they shared was that on an average, organizations fail 43% of the time with their CIS Foundations best practices sort of benchmarking. And in many cases, it's like 32% when it comes to GDPR requirements, 24% when it comes to SOC 2 requirements, right? And this is kind of interesting because this kind of leads to a prediction from Matt. Matt says that public cloud security standards go mainstream, right? Again, quite a dichotomy from what we have seen in the report and your prediction for 2019.
Yeah, absolutely. So you got to remember, CIS, right, the Center for Internet Security, they've had a benchmark or a standard for public cloud security around AWS for probably almost over 2 years now. But they only launched their benchmark for Microsoft Azure just in the last 6 months, and then for GCP in the last 3 months. Organizations don't have an excuse anymore for not adopting these standards for their cloud platforms. In fact, if they had, as we know, a lot of the vulnerabilities that popped up in 2018 wouldn't have been on the radar if they were following those benchmarks.
And Ankur, we know that there are a lot of these reports available built
Yeah.
into Redlock today.
Yeah.
As you interact with customers and organizations and have those conversations with them, do you see them actively look at these reports and sort of understand that this is something which they have to do regularly? Is it something which is becoming a best practice?
Absolutely, yeah. CIS has done a phenomenal job providing a very prescriptive cloud-native security guidelines. Unlike a lot of the other compliance reports, which are sort of really not cloud security friendly, CIS has taken a lot of steps to ensure that they're very prescriptive. Customers are starting there. I do encourage customer to think about CIS as a starting point and not end all be all. Every customer has a different security and compliance mandate. So whenever they think about security framework, they should sort of use CIS as a benchmark and select a tool that allows them flexibility and augment their own sort of custom security and compliance framework and have a continuous monitoring across all those benchmarks. So I see it increasingly. I think it's going to, if anything, it's going to increase more and more. There is more awareness now. Customers are not beholden to compliance rules that were written in 1980s, right? Now they have a more modern version of this. So I think CIS has done a great job, and I see increased adoption in the next few years.
I keep hearing benchmarks. It's still a benchmark. It's not a standard. So Matt, to your point, you said it's going to go mainstream as a standard. Do you see that happening in 2019?
I think it's becomes, as Ankur said, it's more about a foundational aspect. I've been out at many different clients, both as part of Palo Alto Networks and then in my former consulting career, where organizations have literally spent 6, 9, 12 months just trying to agree upon what's a standard for how I secure my cloud. CIS has now taken that completely out, and I've had clients in the last 6 to 9 months who've said, okay, we're going to start with the CIS benchmarks, and then we're going to add requirements on for HIPAA, PCI, etc. They become a great base builder.
I sense some skepticism from Varun.
No, I think there's a big mind shift change. Again, I keep going back to people, process, technology. I think most enterprises are accustomed to compliance programs and audits being point in time. And so you may run a quarterly audit or semi-annual SOC 2 assessment. I think with the cloud, you just can't wait that long. It has to be continuous. It has to be expanded left. So you catch things before they even get into production. And look, I think to Ankur's point, CIS is finally something that is written for the cloud, especially the cloud standards. For everything else, we have a massive team internally that all they do is take traditional standards and controls and try to map them to what it means in the cloud world. At least with CIS, it's built for the cloud in the cloud.
I think one of the things which you mentioned earlier too, you kind of hinted around how the emphasis is going to be on machine learning, onto artificial intelligence. And we kind of heard that also from some of the enterprise conversations which we sort of played around earlier. And the key thing out here is, how is this impacting cybersecurity in general and cloud security in particular? And there was a very interesting prediction from Matt about this. And again, very optimistic about 2019.
He's reading too many books.
Machine learning for security enters the second innings
Absolutely.
in 2019. So
Absolutely.
You want to care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a lot of hype in the industry, right, in cybersecurity specifically around machine learning, artificial intelligence, and really for the most part, it's failed to live up to its expectations. But I think 2019 is the year where, in terms of machine learning algorithms, I think it's the point where things actually start to move from a farm team into the major league to keep up the whole, Major League Baseball initiative analogies here. So I think this next year is when that happens. I think just when we think about the amount of data that's being generated out of cloud platforms, we have to move this way. I mean, we talk all the time about, SOC fatigue, alert fatigue, and there's, number one, not enough talent, and number two, there's just too much data for any human, any group of humans, to possibly find the signal in all that noise.
Varun, your thoughts on that?
I have mixed opinions on that. I think security, machine learning is fundamentally hard in security because finding labeled data to even train your models is extremely hard. So I think companies that say we're 100% AI-based security company, to Matt's point, I'm always skeptical when I hear that advertising going on. I think it's a combination. You need rules and policies for certain use cases. Compliance is a great one. And there are certain use cases for which machine learning is great, right? And an example there is looking for stolen credentials. We talked about IAM. We talked about potential account compromises. There's no rules you can write around that. The best things you can do is learn the behavior and modeling of your admins, and then understand if credentials are potentially leaking on GitHub and someone's stolen them, or what else is happening. And that's really important in the cloud, because principle of least privilege doesn't exist in the cloud. Like if you go to your IT team and say, I need access to AWS, they couldn't tell you what you need access. Heck, you couldn't tell them what you need access to today. And so this is where a great use case of machine learning and continuing to learn your behaviors, your patterns, and then detecting anomalous activity. So it's going to be a combination. I think it takes a lot of work perfecting it. And I think going and saying all we do entirely is machine learning and anomaly detection and AI, I'm skeptical always.
Ankur, your
So,
thoughts?
I tend to agree a little bit more with Varun. I think it's going to take a few more years before AI/ML in enterprise and security goes mainstream. I think 2019 is going to be the year of data. So the companies that capture the most amount of data is going to be in the pole position to win the AI/ML battle. But I do think that the technology adoption curve is starting to be nonlinear, meaning you're going to see the evolution of these kind of technology at a much rapid clip. So I don't think it's going to be 5 to 10 years, but it's still going to take a few years before these algorithms get mature, reduce false positive. You have kind of the high quality data sets that's really required to kind of either predict breach, or once one happens, being able to alert the security teams.
So I just have a question for you.
Yeah.
So like around this, so what is it, do you think, that's actually held back machine learning, specifically around cybersecurity, right? I mean, there's no shortage of data. You talked about like the quality of data, but we're generating, billions and billions of logs every day, right? So just from your perspective, what do you think's been holding it back?
Yeah, so see, up until now, the security industry is generally very fragmented. So, there are not, only a handful of companies that have kind of the data set that's required to really make the predictions.
Okay.
And just like, let's go consumer world. Google was able to separate and discern a cat from a dog only like 2 years ago.
Okay.
Now, it seemed like a simple problem, but it took Google decades to perfect that. Think about fast forward in security, like being able to detect an attacker through ML. It's a very, very complex problem. So it's going to happen, but it's going to take time. It's going to have to be natural evolution. It's not going to be, we don't have AI, and all of a sudden we do.
Okay.
There's going to be a continuum in between. But I'm seeing some positive signals. I think industry is moving in the right direction. Ultimately, the customers want to, they're tired of more alerts. Yeah. They want to have prescriptive few things that are actionable and really indicate a compromise. So I think in general, industry is going the right direction. Just going to take a few years.
Awesome.
Migrating to the cloud, visibility into your own cloud instance, and then incident response, right? So moving from a prevention-only mindset to a detection and response mindset.
Well, we had actually a great set of predictions out there from our panel out here. Now I want to sort of shift the focus a little bit more into something much more actionable for you, something interesting for them to go ahead and do in this year, 2019. So I want to ask the panel to share some of the best practices and recommendations which organizations should follow, at least for the next 12 months, so to combat some of the stark predictions which came out from you, as well as to be more optimistic like Matt. So Matt, what's your suggestion for our audience for a best practice for 2019?
I think 2019 should be the year they focus on automated response. So think about the things in your environment that you never want to happen. So maybe call it your dirty dozen, right? Yeah. What are the 12 things that you never want to have happen in your public cloud environment? And then look for ways that you can automate that, right? This is also a way that you are able to give your developers their ability to be creative, right? Define those guardrails and figure out ways that you can automate the response to those. That's what I would recommend.
Well, automated response, that's one key area. Varun, what about your recommendation?
So I think Matt's cart went before the horse there, so I'll put it in the right order. I think you can't secure what you can't see. And ultimately, in order to do automated response, in order to even decide what are the 12 really bad things that are affecting you, you need visibility. You need visibility into what are your developers doing in these cloud environments. You need visibility into the changes they're making, and you need visibility into the risk that exists in the environment as it stands. And the continuum of change that's going to occur. Because if tomorrow you make an automated remediation change and somebody says, what the heck did you do? At least you have the whole auditability and traceability despite the cloud environments being so dynamic, despite them coming and going. So think of it as an asset inventory system, think of it as a configuration management database, a CMDB for the cloud. But really, really important to get that visibility across your individual lines of businesses and their own individually operated cloud environments.
All right. Gain visibility. Ankur, what about you?
So, mine is, I think customers are going to want to increasingly look at single pane of glass for all on-prem and cloud security needs. Interesting anecdote, I was talking to CISO of one of the major financial institutions a year ago, and he goes, we have a no vendor left behind policy. Customers, and there are many customers like that, right? They've got all kinds of tooling for on-prem and now for cloud. I fundamentally think that having more tools makes customer less secure, not more. So increasingly, they're going to want to focus on a single vendor, single solution, single platform that can solve on-prem as well as cloud security needs, rather than having to have a no vendor left behind policy.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because we have a talk coming up at RSA in 2019 that's called 99 Security Tools and You Still Got Breached.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about. It's about when we look at really large organizations, they have over 100 different tools in their portfolio. And each one of those are often very siloed. So that's what we're going to be talking about. How do you apply the 80-20 rule to your cybersecurity?
Absolutely.
All right, there you go. We have those 3 best practices from our esteemed panelists. We did a recent survey with many of our customers and asked them to actually submit some questions around cloud security in particular. And I'm going to go through some of these questions with our panelists and sort of get their take on that, especially from the perspective that how 2019 is going to sort of evolve from that standpoint, and also what you should be doing when it comes to addressing some of their security challenges. So the first one I'm actually going to ask Matt. You talked a lot about cloud security standards, especially standards which are going to go mainstream.
Sure.
The question is, where can I find out more about the cloud security standards you mentioned?
CIS's website, cissecurity.org. It's the best place to start. They have standards for nearly everything. So containers are really huge, right? So they've got a standard for Docker, for Kubernetes as well. So it's not just the public cloud platforms. That's where I would start, cissecurity.org.
cissecurity.org, that's the place to be. Okay. Varun, here's a question for you. How should we approach a shared security model in the cloud? How do we know who's responsible for what part of the security posture?
I think if you look at all the big 3 cloud providers, it's pretty consistent what they tell you, especially for public cloud infrastructure and PaaS services. The cloud provider is responsible for security off the cloud, which sort of refers to things like routers, switches, hypervisor, physical infrastructure. And customers are responsible for security in the cloud. What they do with the cloud platform, how they decide to use it, how they decide to configure it, what users they put, what applications, what data, what configurations, is ultimately all the customer's responsibility.
So is this question which customers should absolutely ask on both sides of the aisle, both the infrastructure vendor as well as the cloud security vendor? Is that something which is a pivotal question to be asked at the beginning of any project, or is this something which they have to do as an afterthought?
I'm not sure what answers you'd get in the sales process from the cloud service providers, but I think just go with what we recommend or go with what's on their website as well.
Okay. So Ankur, bridging skills gap is one of the biggest topics which comes up in almost every conversation we have today with organizations. And 2019 is not going to be any different from 2018 from that standpoint. What are your suggestions for our audience and organizations in general in terms of what to do when it comes to identifying the skills needed for cloud cybersecurity?
Absolutely. So, a couple of recommendations. Number one is that obviously you need your existing security teams to be well versed with the cloud. They should be speaking the cloud language, obviously. But the second more important advice is automation, automation, automation. The only way these teams are going to be able to scale and keep up with the adoption of cloud is to automate all the processes. And that, we talked a little bit about sort of, shifting left, making sure that the owners of the application, developers are aware of the security implication. It starts there. But even if something falls through the crack, ensure that those same teams are getting the feedback back so that they can go ahead and fix those problems rather than security teams having to track down 50 different people because they don't own these accounts. So a lot of emphasis on operationalization, automation, expand left, right, everywhere. But focusing on that is going to ensure that even with fewer people who are cloud experts, they can sort of tame all the security risk related to cloud.
Warren?
Yeah, I think the first part that he mentioned is easier said than done, which is get this cloud skills into your security team. And the part of that is, AWS itself, as Ankur mentioned earlier, launched 1,500 plus features in 1 year. That's 5 features a day. Add on top a multi-cloud environment. Now you're trying to keep up with 10 to 15 features a day. If you look here at Palo Alto Networks and our public cloud security team, like I mentioned earlier, there's a mini army of people that just do that, as their bread and butter. And so, I think we have to be pragmatic. I think organizations have to be pragmatic about where they decide to build their own solutions versus where they rely on a crowdsourced knowledge of a vendor like Palo Alto Networks, where we are getting all of those insights from across all of our customers, collating them, providing the content as continuous updates into the product. So I think that's certainly one way to address the gap. But then I agree with Ankur on the second one, which is if developers are the ones making the mistake, sort of route through your Jira integrations, ServiceNow integrations, the ability to give that feedback right back to the developer versus traditionally what we've done in security, which is give that feedback into a SOC team through Splunk alerts or something else. And then security is left to do the dirty work, if you will, rather force that function back to developers.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add to what Varun mentioned is also, and something that we've spent a lot of time at Redlock to think about and solve, which is what does it mean to automatically remediate a problem, right? So you have an S3 open or a security group that's overly permissive. The way the sort of product is built is the moment an exposure happens and when the system detects that, it's automatically locked down. Customers have the flexibility to do whatever they want, but the idea here is that when the problem happens, it's automatically fixed. So that's something I encourage customers to start thinking about, what to automatically remediate, what to send tickets for, strike a good balance between the two.
Matt?
Yeah, from my perspective, I completely agree that automation, machine learning, all those types of things are going to help over the next few years. But I think the other thing that organizations need to think about is what is the culture like within the organization, right? So Google is famous for their 20% rule, right? Giving employees the ability to go out and try learn new things. I think that existing organizations, they're trying to go out and they're trying to create the perfect job description, trying to find the unicorn that has all the skills. There's probably like 100 of those people in the entire world. Give your team the flexibility, create the culture in your organization that allows them to go out and to learn those things. Again, this is none of these things are going to be solved overnight. And of course, changing culture in an organization is difficult. But it's something that, if we're to get serious about addressing this over the next few years, culture is a huge piece of it that needs to be addressed.
Thank you for taking time today and joining us out here and sharing your insights. It was great. Predictions were fantastic. There was a very nice banter between all of you. And even if you agreed to disagree, it was good to see that 2019 is going to be a very optimistic year, both from a cybersecurity perspective for all of us. So looking forward to it. Thank you for joining. Visit our public cloud security webpage to get more information around what Palo Alto Networks is doing with regards to securing your public cloud infrastructure. Thanks. Have a great 2019.